Hello, everyone. We are joined this afternoon by Scott Elliot and Patrick McDougall of the Dr. Peter Center. They are here to share their approach to holistic harm reduction. Thank you, Scott and Patrick, for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience with us today.
Great. Well, hi, everyone. So thank you for the introduction. My name's Scott. I'm the Executive Director of the Dr. Peter AIDS Foundation in Vancouver. And joining me today is my colleague, Patrick, who is our Director of Knowledge Translation and Evaluation. So what we thought we would do today, just give you a little overview of what we do, how we do it, and how all of that sort of threads in and relates to harm reduction. And Patrick's the slide master, so I'll be going next slide, and then we'll kind of do it that way. Next slide, Patrick. And so as we look, so who we work with. So the Dr. Peter Center is located in Vancouver. We work with people living with HIV. We work with people who are quite complex in their medical conditions and also their mental health. Most would have substance use either active or not. We don't do primary care, but we do holistic care surrounding everything that we do. So I'll just go to the next slide. If we look at, I'd like to think of things as, we talk about intersectionality now or concentric circles. So all of our folks, have HIV or the vast majority. The vast majority would have defined mental illness. Many of them would have other cognitive impairments. It could be brain damage. It could be from accidents. It could be from overdose. It could be from a lot of different things. And then we have a lot of clinical things like COPD, Hep C, et cetera, et cetera. But the other pieces that they have in common is everybody is marginalized from the regular system. So it's people that would not feel comfortable going to their doctor, or maybe they don't have a doctor they go to regularly. It would be people that have complex medical needs that need to have a lot more high touch care than what your average person would have. Next slide. So when I think about, what it is we do and how we do it, it's easy to say that, because we're in Vancouver, it might be easy to say, or there might be a myth that because we're in Vancouver, we have more resources, that we can do things differently. And I want to tell you that a lot of the things that we see are very similar. I'm going to go to the second bullet point. It's stigma. 100% of our participants, come to the center with a whole baggage of stigma. I mean, they're told all the time that they're not good enough, they're not smart enough. There's stigma around substance use. There's stigma around taking medication. Stigma around being Indigenous. 30% of our participants identify as Indigenous. Stigma around having HIV. And so what we do is we create an environment where everybody can show up in just who they are, how they are, and the way that they want to be that day. And that's a patient-centered approach that we use, that we all talk about, but frankly, it doesn't always land, for people. And it's something that we try to ensure that everybody feels, that warm hug, of complex comfort care. So one of the things that we do is we're a purpose organization, but we're also very values driven. And it's super important for us that our values are felt and sensed to the whole organization. We have a little acronym, IHAS. So it's integrity. Everybody, you've got to show up. You've got to do what you say you're going to do. But there's also the integrity of the organization. If one piece of it's not working, then it's not going to work for anybody, right? So it all has to work in whole. There's humanity. The piece that I think we often forget is that everybody's a human, right? Like all of us, staff, board, participants, everybody. So we really try and come from this place where we don't use the word love per se, but it's a very loving approach. It's a very compassionate approach. Authenticity, we are who we are, and we encourage everybody to not put on airs. Our staff are you know, I'm in a toque. I'm the executive director in a toque. I'm not in my house. I'm in my house right now. Sorry, I'm not in my office at the moment. But even in the office, be the same way. The way we talk to participants is the same way we talk to government. It's the same way we talk to medical practitioners. So there's an authenticity that I think is really important. Another value is self-determination. We believe very, very strongly that every participant has the choice to decide for themselves. They come to the center, it's their choice. Nobody has to. They can come in and just grab food and leave. That's fine. They can come in and just get medical, like their medical services, whether that be medication management, using our harm reduction room, which is a supervised ejection site that we've been running now for 20 years. Whatever it is, it's their choice, and something that we really value, right? Inclusivity is another value that we want people to be a part of. No one is separate from, you know, the Dr. Peter Center. It's not to say everybody does the same thing or that everybody's equal, or it's not that. It's just that everybody's included. Everybody can be a part of what we're doing there. And the last value is tenacity. And tenacity is not one that we hear with organizations often. And for us, what tenacity really means is that we're not afraid of, you know, taking on hard things. We're not afraid about having hard conversations. And we do it in a very respectful way. And that could be with participants, that could be with policy, that could be with funders, that could be with government. It doesn't matter what that is. And I kind of look at I've been at the Dr. Peter Center about 5 years now. And when I first started, one of the things I looked at is what's the archetype of our staff, you know, like how do we present these values? And I would say our staff are quiet warriors. And what I mean by that, it's this more feminine energy where people are nice and we talk things through if you know, but at the same time, we'll defend our people, we'll defend our values. It's like, you don't walk between a mama bear and a cub. You know, it's like you leave them to be that they work really great. You walk in between, and that mama bear is quite tenacious. So that's a huge part of what we do. And to describe the center itself, we've got 3 major components. One is we have a day health program. We have about 420 people right now in our day health program. They can come in for food. We do 2 meals a day, all prepared on site. So we end up doing about 70,000 meals a year. We have, so they can come in for their food. There's the clinical services that we do. So we have 3 to 4 nurses on at all times. We're not primary care. We keep everybody connected to a doctor or a GP in the community. Because if someone decides they don't want to come to the Dr. Peter Center anymore, we don't want them to lose all continuity of care. And so we make sure they're connected in that way. And we have harm reduction services. So that's a suite. We have people that are in abstinence, and so we walk with them in the abstinence side. We have people that use our supervised consumption site, and that's mainly for intravenous drug use. We don't have inhalation, and we don't have inhalation. We need it, but we don't have it because of policy that we're not allowed to build a site, you know, in the facility, and we don't have room outside to do a trailer. We also do IOTs, which is intravenous opioid agonist therapies, where we give participants injectable diacetylmorphine. And we've used both hydromorphone and diacetylmorphine over the past 3 years. And we found that the demand is really on the DAMs or diacetylmorphine, not on the hydromorphone. The third component we do on site is therapeutic programming. So this is a part of that whole, you know, that whole person. So we have art therapy, music therapy, recreational therapy, and counseling. So the idea is someone can come into the Dr. Peter Center, they can get their medication, be that street drugs, be that IOTs, be that just their HIV meds, they can get food, and they can get therapeutic support in a holistic, stigma-free environment. So it's really trying to provide a true wraparound service. We also have a long-term residence on site where we have 24 suites. 12 of those are still long-term, and 12 of those are now short-term stabilization, where someone will come in for 3 to 6 months. It's complex care, which means we work with people who will have very difficult kind of ongoing complex medical needs. And we also allow people in our facility who might not fit in other places. They might be intravenous drug users and they can use on-site in their suites. We offer supervised injection right there. They could be nocturnal. We have people coming and going, all throughout 24 hours a day. And even with things like COVID, my parents are in long-term care and they were shut down. They had to stay in their building. They weren't allowed to leave or they would have been kicked out. Whereas with our participants, they can't handle that. And so to tell them that, they would just leave and never come back, right? So we had to find a whole bunch of other ways to work with them, to give them a different type of care that met their needs, as well as could meet within a framework of safety and so forth that we put together. We also right now have 14 suites offsite, where it's just literally across the street, and those people are semi-independent living, and then they would come to the Dr. Peter Center for services and so forth. So that's kind of the model of what we do. And I'm going quite quickly because I do want to leave time for questions at the end if there are some. But I think what I'll do now is I'll give you an example of a real human being to allow you to try and get a sense of what it's like. So Robert, it's not his real name, but this is a real person. So Robert had been coming about 15 years, intravenous drug user. And he didn't identify as one of our long-term care people. He never saw himself as being there. He had street cred. Robert was, he was a buff guy. He was kind of tough, and very nice. But then he had a stroke. And so that combined with everything else that was going on in his life, his active drug use, et cetera, he wasn't able to take care of himself. And that's when Robert came and lived with us. So next slide, Patrick. So Robert lived with us for just under a year. And when we had known him for a long time. And so we knew who he was and so forth. And he used our supervised consumption site daily for many years. So when he was in the residence, we just asked him, if you're using in the room, let us know. There's no stigma. We just want to make sure that you're safe. And so that's exactly, what we were able to do with him. And the example for this is really looking about how do we work with people and how do we work with someone and giving him complete choice. We'll go to the next slide. So as he started to deteriorate and he passed away last September. So the thing though about Robert, last year we had at the Dr. Peter Center in 2021, we had 23 deaths. 18 of those were considered, not expected deaths, so likely due to overdose. Robert's wasn't. His body just failed. But the beautiful thing about his passing is he wasn't on his own. He wasn't, in the street. He wasn't forgotten. He was surrounded by people who cared for him and who truly loved him in a way that that he was able to accept. We never put any boundaries on him. We never tried to tell him to do things in a different way. It was all, his choice. Next slide. So when we talk about supervised consumption, we started in 2002. We were actually North America's first supervised injection site, but we weren't the first public nor the first with legal federal exemption. That was Insight in Vancouver. We were open before them, but we were open under a loophole in the BC Nursing Act. And so I mention that because that's tenacity. I was not with the organization then, but the organization, we weren't able to get legal federal exemption. So we found a workaround and were able to actually do the service, on site for many years. I put it here because it's true. We were also armed with a team of lawyers, because technically our staff could have been charged with trafficking at any time. So we wanted to make sure that, from day one, that we never got into trouble, and we did it. Next slide. So when we think about how things have evolved, right? Things have evolved a lot in the harm reduction world. So here's a slide here about our IOUts. But when we think about harm reduction, we think that entire, continuum from abstinence. And just as an example, I've been in abstinence for more than 30 years. I'm a recovering addict and a recovering alcoholic, and I'm working in a facility that gives out injectable heroin. So for anybody working with us, we have to reconcile that wherever we are in that harm reduction kind of path, whether we use drugs, don't use drugs, we drink, we don't drink, whatever, everybody else, it's their choice. And so IOTS is kind of the Cadillac program of safe supply. And so one that I think has really turned the dial for people who there was no other treatment that was working for them. We right now have 20 people in the program, but we've had about 70 go through. And the interesting part about this from a clinical standpoint is some of those came on and they found that hydromorphone or diacetylmorphine didn't work for them, went back to street drugs. Some came on and found that what they were really interested in then after they'd been part of the program was going on to oral or trying to wean off of an opioid or substance use disorder completely. And then others just sort of faded in and out, and some passed away from illegal street drugs or from medical conditions. So there's been this whole range, right? But what we found is for a core group of individuals, this keeps them stable. So it allows them to not have to hustle, for their next fix. It allows them to take some of that time and focus on other things. Next slide. I just want to show you, this because we did this study, about a decade ago, I think, Patrick, now, right? Like 7-10 years ago, where we started to talk, and we started to talk about food as harm reduction, because at the Dr. Peter Center, it kind of goes like this. You use drugs, great. You don't use drugs, great. You quit drugs, great. You started drugs, great. Did you have lunch? Now, that's kind of a caricature of what we do, but it's true, right? Because the drug use doesn't matter. What matters is we just want you to be healthy as you can. And if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you got to start with food and a safe space to be, right? So the three kind of big buckets of the organizations are day health program, about 420 people coming in there. Our live-in facility where we have 24 on site at all times. So that could be 40 people in a year, plus an additional 14 people that live across the street. And the third bucket is where we look at knowledge translation and evaluation. So over the past 5 years, and much longer in terms of having people come and visit, showing people what we do around harm reduction, work in HIV, work in hepatitis C. Over the last 5 years, we've started working with about 160 organizations across the country and sharing best practices. And these have been grants through the Public Health Agency of Canada and also through Health Canada's SUOP program. So I'd like to ask Patrick to come in now and talk to those a little bit.
Wonderful, Scott. Thanks very much. And as Scott mentioned, I'm the Director of Knowledge Translation and Evaluation at the Dr. Peter Center. And much of my team's work is with other organizations across the country. We've been fortunate to receive some funding from Public Health Agency of Canada, as well as Health Canada's Substance Use and Addictions Program, to be able to do some capacity building with organizations across the country that are interested in expanding the suite of harm reduction services that they offer. So in that last 5 years, we've now working with about 160 organizations. That might include some health authorities and what have you, but many it's small organizations in, large cities, the Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. But often I think we're seeing that many of the organizations that are looking for that support are in some of the more rural or even remote communities. And certainly we saw during when COVID hit that there was a need to expand harm reduction services in some of those rural and remote communities. So we started looking at how can we support agencies interested in offering overdose prevention sites or overdose prevention services within COVID-19 shelters. We also looked at how we could support vaccine confidence in and amongst the agencies and marginalized populations that those agencies were serving. A new component for us, while we have always worked quite a bit with Indigenous partners, we've now come to a formal partnership with an organization called CAN, formerly known as Canadian Aboriginal AIDS Network. We are on a partnership path to be able to be creating knowledge bundles of harm reduction, knowledge, best practices, wise practices that we can disseminate to the community. I'd say, and this is just our last slide here, one of the things that's been really key in the last 4 to 5 years as we've been doing some of this knowledge translation work is how we can find ways to bridge the gap in harm reductions. Often there'll be a lot of voices from the community identifying a need, and there might be within government saying, well, we understand that that's a need, but how do you bridge those gaps? And through some of the project work that we've been doing, we've been able to create structures for employing people who use drugs, offering some opportunities for community to get together and formalize material that can help bring some necessary services to life. And if I could leave with a parting word or two, is just community is key. And that might mean listening to the community of people who use drugs. It might mean listening to the community-based organizations. These are the points that really have a lot of the local intelligence. And right now, as you can see from this slide, we are working towards pushing some policy change in some key areas. Scott, back over to you.
Great. I see a question. A question came in. What do the Indigenous knowledge bundles look like? And the answer is going to be really fast, probably not the one you want, but it's going to be stay tuned. This project is literally just starting, so we don't know yet. But what it comes down to, when we look at organizations, communities, or whatnot, where abstinence has been the only way that we can talk about drug and alcohol use, we have to find new ways of talking about these things if we want to talk about harm reduction. And so that's where the idea of knowledge bundles will be coming in. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, and that's what the partnership with CAN is about. And we'll be working with elders, we'll be working with communities over the next a year, kind of like a big push, and then over the next 5 years as well. So stay tuned. We really hope to have more, in the next few months about the progress of that project. So I'm not seeing any other questions. We're almost at time anyways, but maybe, Patrick, is there any final parting words that you would like to, I heard relationships, I heard, is there anything else?
Yeah, I think, I'm also just struck by the fact that it's, I say community is key. And of course, local community is key. We would never, here in Vancouver, it is a balmy 7 degrees Celsius. And Scott had referenced this idea of, even being able to set up an inhalation tent, which, in the middle of February is actually feasible, in a community like Vancouver. Of course, that would not work in the Yukon. So it's, looking at what the local community can do. But, just my experience over the last many years has been that local community has those answers. They've got that intelligence. They've got that knowledge of the know-how and what to do. And just so integral to be able to create structures to be able to hear from them, definitely pay folks, people who use drugs, for their time, their valuable expertise and their insight. They're the ones with the knowledge who are, that are going to help in terms of shaping services that really meet their needs.
Thanks. And for me, there's two thoughts. The first one is it's not always easy work, right? Like I just think about our IELTS program. Every time we had something go right, we had a couple things go wrong because we were designing this because it didn't exist in our type of setting. So a lot of the work that we're doing is novel, you know, and it's new. And a lot of the work that we're doing is in a chaotic environment, a chaotic space, and it's highly emotionally charged. If you're working the front lines, it is highly emotionally charged because we literally see people die. And so being able to have, you know, that, is that it? Sorry, I think, oh, thank you. Sorry about that. I didn't quite hear you. So being able to, you know, have that compassion, you know, for ourselves, even as we go forward, for our partners and for our funders, like we're all in this together in the sense that it's a space that, you know, it's just, there's no one that's gone ahead of us in this space. So I think that's one thing I would just really remind people is how do we ensure that we feel good about, you know, what we're doing going forward. So I think, you know, the last thing I would say is, you know, I hear it lots, but, you know, kindness is, there's not enough kindness, you know, period. And when we look at who we work with, quite often, like our participants, we know everybody by name. We know, we're able to talk to them. We give them eye contact. You know, we're friendly, we're kind, you know, and kindness goes a long ways. So with that, I think we'll wrap up here. Wish you all a great summit. Happy to answer any questions, you know, offline. If there's anything specifically you want to know about our IELTS program, about how we've bundled not the Indigenous knowledge bundles around harm reduction, but that idea of a holistic care in a trauma-informed care environment. So that's it for us. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your conference, everybody.
Thank you so much, Scott and Patrick, for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience with us today. It will really stick with me how you outlined holistic care within a trauma-informed care environment, but with also the importance of community, continuous learning, kind of being compassionate with ourselves as we do that learning, and then ensuring that kindness is central to our interventions. So if folks are able to stay tuned on this live stream feed, we'll have some closing remarks here in this session in just a few minutes. So if you just stick around, maybe get a glass of water, we'll be right back with closing remarks. Thank you.